A recent discussion by RFK Jr. and his decision to remove COVID vaccines for healthy children and healthy pregnancies has drawn attention to the fact as to whether or not COVID mRNA vaccines are actually safe. And it's a reasonable question for people to have because we've already seen what happened with AstraZeneca, where it was removed by the company. It wasn't taken off the market by the regulators, but the point is that it's no longer available. And part of the question is what should happen with COVID mRNA vaccines? And it's causing a lot of controversy across the world. As you should know, if you're following me, I'm very nuanced in the way that I think about things. And my thinking on this is around the science and where we are. And so if you want to hear my thoughts, just remember, I don't follow any narrative, whatever narrative is out there. I just look and think very objectively about where we are and what is happening. Here is the post that drew a lot of attention in terms of this was by Nicholas Holtscher. He is linked with the McCullough Foundation, the epidemiologist. And he was highlighting that RFK Jr. confirms the removal of COVID-19 vaccine recommendations for healthy kids and pregnant women. And it appears that high-risk infants and pregnant women may still be targeted. And I'm going to play the clip from that. It's only about a minute long. And listen to what has been said. And I'll add a few thoughts as it goes along. So let's listen to what was being said. And the three people in the picture is you have RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya. He was the guy who was against lockdowns, and Marcus Macari. Can't remember if I pronounced this correctly, but again, these three have all taken an alternative position against the vaccine rollout in context of the pandemic. So let's hear what he has to say.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary, and I'm here today with NIH Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. I couldn't be more pleased to announce that as of today, the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women has been removed from the CDC recommended immunization schedule. Last year, the Biden administration urged healthy children to get yet another COVID shot.
Pausing there just for a minute. The first thing is that for me, when I was looking at what was happening in the pandemic, you have to remember the trajectory in 2021. We knew to vaccinate the high risk because they were at risk of severe COVID-19. There was an emergency use authorization. The initial results from the Pfizer studies were favorable. And so there was good reason at the time to argue that those who were at high risk, because they had removed early treatment and they had removed any other option. So this is one of the points that people don't quite get with my position, is that I'm quite pragmatic. If they've taken away everything and the only option is this, then the question is, if that's your only option, what are the risks and the benefits? And so we knew what was happening with the high risk. We knew that they had to be targeted. But then it went and evolved into the low risk cohorts. And I remember thinking, what are they doing? We know the younger people are low risk. Why are they then going down the line? And then beyond that, they then started to put in vaccine mandates. And even at that point, there was never really any serious plan for children. And that's very, very important, because my point is that parents, if they were really concerned about their kids, they would have ensured that their kids got the vaccine before themselves. And so if people remember carefully, kids weren't really that much a problem in terms of severe disease. Now, things may have altered a little bit with Omicron, but at that time, that was the predominant view. Across the UK, the children who died all had some kind of comorbidity. And so a healthy child, the risk was exceptionally low. And so the argument that they should have been vaccinated, for me, never made much sense, especially with a novel technology and you noticing that there were issues like myocarditis, for which I didn't think that the arguments that it was so minor it could be ignored. I knew they hadn't researched that in detail. But let's get back to what else he had to say.
Despite the lack of any clinical data to support the repeat booster strategy in children.
That ends today. It's common sense and it's good science.
There's no evidence healthy kids need it today, and most countries have stopped recommending it for children.
And that is a very important point. Yes, finally, the US is catching up with the rest of the world, and they are no longer recommending it for healthy children. And I think in most countries, certainly across Europe and the Western world, they will still recommend it for children with comorbidities, but not the average healthy child. Now, you have to remember there is a counter argument. Some people say that it can impact with regards to long COVID, and so therefore children should still have it or the option of it because of long COVID. I don't buy that discussion, even though they are at risk for long COVID. Based on my research, I know that in some cases, just vaccinating can cause long COVID symptoms. But yes, they are right. Infection can also cause it. And sometimes in some cohorts, vaccination can mitigate it. But even that, you don't understand the mechanism. And that to me is always a red flag. But let's continue with what else he had to say.
We're now one step closer to realizing President Trump's promise to make America healthy again.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and
Yes, so that is part of the strategy that RFK has been taking and focused on. And he did have to make a step like this because it was relevant to his mandate in terms of trying to protect children. The question that has come up is whether or not it should be completely removed for everybody. Now, this is where, and my opinion now is different from many people on both sides of the fence, is that I tend to be quite balanced in where I look at things. What we know so far is that there was an impact on the mitigation of severe COVID-19. Based on my research, looking at the characteristics of what happened with antibodies in terms of the vaccines, I strongly believe that a large proportion of that protection for only about 3 to 6 months was because of IgG4 antibodies. They're immune suppressive, and so it would fit that they impact on the cytokine storm. So in that sense, the vaccine is almost functioning like a therapeutic to protect people in the short term. The problem we've got now is that even though they are restricting the use of vaccines, we haven't as yet heard any clear strategy for what is going to be used in replacement. And so what had happened in the first part of the pandemic was that in your basket was only vaccines, nothing else. Everything else had been taken off the table. And so now what we've got is that we're removing vaccines from the basket. It means, therefore, there is nothing else in the basket. That's a problem. And so this is where I said people have to be nuanced in their thinking. Understand how something works, understand what benefit it can bring, and learn how to use it. So here's my example for how I think. So a lot of the argument on that post, and I had shared a comment on this just so that you understand, I was saying it was important to maintain as many options in your toolbox. And we know what the limitations can be. We know the strengths and the weaknesses. And so therefore, high-risk cohorts, in my view, scientifically, can still make sense. And you'll have to understand why I said that. But you could see some of the responses. They a lot of people were very upset that I didn't take a stance against the vaccine. How many people is it acceptable to kill with such a product? And so let me explain how I tend to look at things. When it comes to any intervention, so let's take, for example, thalidomide. Let's go all the way to one end. Thalidomide is a good drug if you don't give it to pregnant women. It doesn't mean that you kill thalidomide. You can still use it in conditions, especially in men. Leprosy, it's a very good drug. And you can utilize something when you understand the strengths and the limitations. Similarly, another very important therapy that we use is warfarin. It technically is rat poison, but if you use it in the right dose at the right time, it can be a tremendously valuable and still an important aspect of the arsenal with regards to health. So again, my point is, if you understand the mechanism as to what happens, especially with regards to IgG4 and the neutralization that can happen, is that in some people, if they have no other options and they are high risk for complications, because here is the reality. Let's just show you where my thinking is when it comes to what we're up against now. Some people think that everything is about the vaccine. Another group thinks everything is about the infection. I am definitely right in the middle. And here is what I am concerned about. I am concerned about the COVID storm, where if you have a vaccinated population that is immune primed with recurring COVID infections, you then have the nidus for an absolute disaster, because the two together could then create huge autoimmune problems down the line. That's what I'm focused on. And so when I look at it that way, you then have to think about where are we in the cycle as to what's happening, because we are still having recurring infection. The NB181 is now starting to circulate again. And what we're likely to see, very similar to what happened in Hong Kong, they were recognizing that the people who were up to date with their boosters had less risk of severe problems than those who weren't. We have an issue now where people are on a treadmill, and I'm not sure if they can come off it. That's how I look at it. If you are on that booster treadmill, it's not easy to get off it, because you may have a rebound in terms of the direction of your immune response on exposure to the virus. That's my biggest concern. And so when I look at it through that nuanced view, is that if people are on the treadmill and are high risk, we really have to start thinking. First, you have to be honest with them and say, listen, guys, we've got a problem here. It's kind of like what can happen with steroids. I love steroids. They're extremely valuable. But if you have somebody on it, you need to wean them down off it gradually, because if it's on it for a longer period of time and you stop suddenly, you have a rebound drop in their cortisol, Addisonian type symptoms. That's where they get very sick. And so we have a situation here where I suspect in highly vaccinated populations, a lot of people are going to be at risk if you drop the IgG4 levels and you have new circulating variants that are breaking through their immunity. In theory, and some people have said this, well, why don't we use just therapeutics? The reality is that a whole cohort of the population will never use the drugs that probably will save them, simply because they have been told that these things are rubbish. And so they will never use it. No matter what you show them, no matter what you tell them, they will never use it. And so then, do you leave them with nothing, or do you use something that can still have at least transient benefit in terms of immune suppression? This is where we are at the moment. And I feel very strongly that you inform patients, you give them the statistics, you give them the information, you let them decide. One of the biggest mistakes of the pandemic were, in my view, mandates, where they were forcing people to do something because they thought it was right. I never want to see that happen from either the pro or the anti crowd. I think that people must be given choice, they must be given information, they must be allowed to make that decision for themselves. And so, from my personal point of view, I would never do anything that takes away choice from the patient. I would inform them risks, benefits. This is where you are. What do you want to do? Recognize that we're in a situation where we have no idea going forward what the likely implications are. That's the reality. Because, as I explained before, this COVID storm of recurring infection, in my view, is an absolute nightmare. I have no idea how we're going to get out of this one. And this is why Gert's prediction that this is not going to end well, I think is right. So the question becomes, how do you mitigate the damage? If you can't fix it, if you can't get out of the loop easily, how do you, in the short term, manage the situation to reduce the risk across the population? That's where we are at the moment. And sadly, there is still not honest discourse. I'm giving you, as frankly as I can, what I think is the point about where we are now. This is an extremely complex situation. Nobody, I think, at the beginning of the pandemic had any idea that the vaccines wouldn't be able to block the transmission of virus at the level that is happening. I don't think anybody thought that you could be having this much circulation of virus at this point. And therefore, it means that we are in an unknown situation. It's very difficult to know what the right thing to do is. But my view is that you're honest, you're open, you say what you know, you say what you don't know, and you make sure you have as many options in the toolbox as possible. Similar to when you're talking to patients with smoking, if they tell you that they're never going to stop smoking, you don't throw them out of the office. You negotiate, you discuss with them. You say, okay, if you're not going to stop smoking, here's what I want you to do about your blood pressure, or I want you to stop alcohol, or whatever. That's the kind of discussion that we need to understand where people are in this cycle and to give them the best information so that they can choose for themselves. I think that is very important to remain nuanced, to remain scientific, and not to get caught up too much in the narratives. Now, I'm just looking at some of the points that people are making here. So here is a question here. This is from Kay. So what do you do if you have leukemia and your fellow patients died in great numbers? Would you vax? Wow. Well, already straight away in the context of leukemia, they're already immune suppressed. And so this is why I said you have to be nuanced. You have to think about what it is that you're looking at. If they are already immune suppressed, then would you gain by giving them additional immune suppression? However, you have to recognize that cancer has a higher risk of poor outcomes with COVID infection. And so, in truth, if I was able to advise that kind of patient, the big challenge is to try and mitigate their risk from getting infected. You just don't want virus in the bloodstream. That's essentially all you have to achieve. If you can protect the mucosal immunity, that's where you use things like vitamin D. You can't speak about some of the other drugs that can be used to try and help to mitigate that. But suppose they're in the cohort that they say they will never use that. Is it that you give them absolutely nothing? That's where you have to look very carefully at the risk benefit situation. And you look at the numbers, you inform the patient, and you say, what do you want to do? And I've learned that you listen to people and you will know where they want to go. That's as best as we can do. I don't think there are any right answers at the moment. Somebody here doesn't think you're caught in the narrative. Recheck your evaluation on the danger of COVID. I understand the perspective, and I have an autoimmune paradigm. And so when I speak about the dangers of COVID, I'm not talking about severe disease. I'm talking about this here. If you understand what I mean, this is what I think is the problem, is that you have mild symptoms, but underneath that, you have chronic immune activation, and that then leads to many of the complications down the line after a COVID infection. I don't think this is simple at all. This is very, very complex, and there is no easy way out of it, as I said before. So just because an infection is mild, I keep on reminding people, HIV is mild as well when somebody gets it. They have a mild viral flu-like illness within 4 weeks. Does that mean that HIV is not a problem? No, it will destroy the immune system longer term. So it just depends on the time frame that you're looking at in order to try and understand what is going on. Just looking, if you have any other questions, throw them in. I'm just looking through here, and I'm happy for you to criticize my views. I don't have any strong feeling that I have to be right. I'm just sharing with you what I think based on what I've looked at from the scientific point of view. Okay, here's something from Amanda, Secret Garden. I feel the risks gained over incubation in the people injected, creating mutated, stronger strains. Some make the eyes weep. Fluid COVID is a virus as we have not known before. And she's right. So this is part of the problem. This is a really good point, because as Gert had pointed out, the more that you put the virus under pressure, the more it mutates. And the further it mutates, the higher the risk to everybody, not just the vaccinated, but the unvaccinated. And to be frank, when Garrett pointed out that we are not only putting humans at risk, we're putting animals at risk because they are also getting infected, that's when we have a very serious situation that has to be addressed. So yes, there is no easy answer as to that broad use. Are we putting more people at risk by driving immune variants? I think that's a very reasonable point. Should this then mean that you have to stop at some point and use whatever other tools that you have in your basket? So any issues with other general vaccinations that are needed for travel? No, I don't particularly have any issues as such. This one here, they had to lie about all the other treatments for emergency use. This is something I've covered in the past. I agree. And many people miss what the biggest issue was with regards to emergency use. It was the fact that steroids were not properly explored. In June 2020, if they had completely explored the steroid argument, you would have found that we probably didn't need to do what we did, but that's a whole different different story. A number of scientists, including medical doctors, knew that transmission was never any part of a clinical trial. Yes, and this is true. It was suppressed to a certain extent. It wasn't the focus when the information was being shared. And this is part of the reason. When I look back at it, this was a huge gamble by public health, politicians, the scientific community, and it backfired. And this is why trust in science has fallen through so significantly. And they need to take responsibility for that, because some of the decisions that were made, I think, means that they had to work. And if they didn't work, it would have been a situation like it is now, where it was going to explode. I just can't understand how we get gamblers in these kinds of leadership positions. You shouldn't be gambling. Be honest, be open, talk about the risk, talk about the benefits, and take it from there. Let's just see. I have one more question. Thoughts on the Nobel Prize being given to further delay the realization of genomic integration? This is a good point, off grid. I had spoken about this at the time. The Nobel Prize usually is about 10 to 15 years after the technology has been done before people are given it. This one was given within 2 years. And I thought they're going to damage the reputation of the Nobel Prize by doing that. Why would they take that's a gamble again? You're using a novel technology, and they gave the Nobel Prize for pseudouridine, which wasn't even used in the vaccines. And I mean, it's incredible. So I think that the Nobel Committee is going to come back to this as a huge mistake. They shouldn't have done it. It was a political move, and they potentially have damaged the reputation of the Nobel Prize by giving it out so early, because the outcomes in the longer term are going to come through. Somebody says here, the bad side effects of the jabs will be going on forever. Well, we I think that the recent information coming out of the VSafe that was shared in the Senate, 7.7% needing to see their doctor, hospitalization, and so on, is extremely high. And I think that that information wasn't in the public arena. And so, yes, I think when we look back at this, if you're still talking about the high risk who were really in the risk for severe COVID-19, you could argue that the risk benefit was there for some of them. But for low risk populations, I have always said this was always going to be a problem, especially when I look through it from the autoimmune paradigm. And there needs to be some responsibility and accountability for that, not just simply the platitudes. The people who were involved in those decisions, need to come back and justify why they did what they did at that time. So yes, those are some of my points. Just a reminder for coming up in another day is the hidden drivers of post-COVID dysfunction. We're having experts from across the world. And the link is in the description. You can join us then, and make sure that you keep up to date with the science. There's still a lot of work to do, and we still have a lot of hurdles to overcome because the virus is still circulating. We have challenges ahead. Thank you.